Huntington's disease, also known as HD, is an inherited neurological illness causing involuntary movements, severe emotional disturbance, and cognitive decline. It is a brain disorder that affects a person's ability to think, talk, and move. In the 16th century, Paracelsus, a Renaissance alchemist, coined the term chorea to describe the dance-like, uncoordinated movements that are now known to be symptoms of Huntington's disease. In 1872, George Huntington wrote a landmark paper called On Chorea. George Huntington provided thorough descriptions of Huntington's disease symptoms using personal accounts of his father's patients. He also emphasized Huntington's disease's hereditary nature. In 1967, famous poet and songwriter Woody Guthrie died of HD. Guthrie's wife created the Committee to Combat Huntington's Disease, now called the Huntington's Disease Society of America, to provide public health outreach on HD. In 1972, Thomas L. Perry finds diminished levels of GABA in the brains of HD patients, and in 1973, John Meeks and Natalie Stein suggest that the Huntington's disease allele causes premature aging. In the late 1970s, researchers find evidence that HD affects cells all over the body, not just in the brain. In 1993, the location of the Huntington gene is discovered at the 4p16.3 gene site on chromosome 4. The gene is found to contain codon CAG in varying numbers. An abnormal number of CAG repeats turns out to be a highly reliable way to tell whether someone has the allele for HD. Today, organizations help to provide information and support for people with HD and their families. Research is ongoing to try and find a cure for Huntington's disease. After the child is born, doctors can identify the disease by first doing a series of neurological and psychological tests. A genetic test can then confirm the diagnosis by determining if the person indeed has inherited the HD gene mutation. Since the disease is autosomal dominant and only needs one copy of the gene to show up, you would know if the child has the disease by checking if it has at least one of the genes on the chromosome from one of the parents. HD is caused by a mutation in a gene on chromosome 4. The job of its protein product, Huntington, is to direct the delivery of vesicles containing important molecules to the outside of the cell. Normally, the coding region of this gene contains the DNA sequence CAG repeated again and again. The number of times this triplet is repeated varies from person to person, ranging from 10 to 26 times. People with HD have an abnormally high number of these CAG triplets, approximately 40 or more. This likely disrupts the function of the gene's protein product, but how the expansion of the CAG repeat causes disease is unknown. Somehow, the brain cells of HD patients accumulate clumps of protein that become toxic, resulting in cell death. Some patients lose more than 25% of their brain cells before they die. Huntington's disease is inherited in an autosomal dominant pattern. This means that everyone who inherits the faulty gene will eventually get the disease. A parent with a mutation in the HD gene has a 50% chance of passing the disease to their children. One copy of the altered gene in each cell is sufficient to cause the disorder. An affected person usually inherits the altered gene from one affected parent. People are born with a defective gene, but symptoms usually don't appear until middle age, about 30 to 40 years old. Huntington's disease affects an estimated 3 to 7 per 100,000 people of European ancestry. In the United States, about 1 in every 30,000 people has Huntington's disease. The disorder appears to be less common in some other populations, including people of Japanese, Chinese, and African descent. Huntington's disease affects the part of the brain that controls thinking, emotion, and movement. Most people who have the disease start to see symptoms between the ages of 30 and 50. But symptoms can appear earlier or later in life. The disease gets progressively worse in the next 10 to 15 years. Symptoms include poor memory, depression and/or mood swings, lack of coordination, twitching, or other uncontrolled movements, and difficulty walking, speaking, and/or swallowing. In the late stages of the disease, a person will need help doing even simple tasks like getting dressed. Currently, there are no treatments that can stop or reverse the course of HD. Tetrabenazine is prescribed for treating chorea. Antipsychotic drugs also may help alleviate chorea and may also be used to help control hallucinations, delusions, and violent outbursts. Drugs may be prescribed to treat depression and anxiety. Drugs used to treat the symptoms of HD may have side effects such as fatigue, sedation, decreased concentration, or restlessness, and should only be used when symptoms create problems for the individual. Huntington's disease usually runs its full terminal course in 10 to 30 years. It has been observed that the earlier in life the symptoms of HD appear, the faster the disease progresses. The bedridden patient in the final stages of Huntington's disease often dies from complications such as heart failure or pneumonia. Born in 1912, Woody Guthrie was an American folk musician. His best-known song is "This Land Is Your Land." By the late 1940s, Guthrie's health was declining. He received various misdiagnoses, but in 1952, it was finally determined that he was suffering from Huntington's disease. He was soon hospitalized at Greystone Park State Hospital in Morris Plains, New Jersey. During the more than 15 years that the disease affected him, he struggled to communicate. He had trouble singing and playing music. In 1967, Woody Guthrie lost his battle with HD. He was just 55 years old. Soon after his death, his widow Marjorie vowed to do something about this silent killer. At the time, little was known about the disease. Marjorie placed a small ad in a New York City newspaper and slowly gathered a determined handful of volunteers and HD families from across the United States. From that first moment, when Marjorie Guthrie reached out to other HD families, a worldwide movement began that would change the lives of those living with HD and bring hope to families. Her work resulted in what is today the Huntington's Disease Society of America. The Huntington's Disease Society of America is a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of everyone affected by HD. Based in New York, the organization helps fund research and promotes knowledge of the disease. In the area of care, HDSA has created a national network of resources and referrals that are unmatched by any other HD organization. HDSA Centers of Excellence provide medical and social services to those affected by HD and their families.